Welcome back to another video on the Sports Religion YouTube channel. Today we have an interesting project. We will be doing a 2019 NFL mock redraft, if you will. So basically I'm going to be ranking all of the players from the 2019 NFL draft in the order that I think they should be picked if we were to do the draft again today. This is a really fun kind of way to look back and see how each of these players have developed. I'll only be doing a one-round mock draft for this because there's only so many good players, and if you kind of get past the first round, it's hard to really fill in the rest of the draft. So I think that one round is adequate for this kind of thing when you're looking back on all of these players. So today we're going to be using the NFL Mock Draft Database Simulator. It's a website that you can use for free. Really fun to kind of go back in time and make your own drafts with past players. So let's get it started. The Cardinals were up first in 2019, and they took Kyler with that pick originally. Kyler, you could take him again here. He's definitely a franchise quarterback. Don't let the injuries fool you on that. He's had good years. We've seen Kyler as an MVP candidate in the past. Hopefully he gets back to that level of play. But I think for the sake of this activity, we'll definitely be taking one of the defensive players here. I just absolutely love the edge rushers that came out of this class. I mean, look at some of the guys we have at the top of this list. So, you kind of see Nick Bosa, Max Crosby, Josh Allen. And then on the defensive line, we have absolute studs as well. Quinnen Williams, Ed Oliver, Christian Wilkins. But I think that the guy that has to go first overall if you were to rerun this draft over, for me, would be Max Crosby. I mean, just look at the career that he's carved out for himself. It's an incredible story. Absolute steal by the Raiders in the late rounds of the draft. You look at how they kind of deploy him all over the front seven of their defense, and he can be effective and win at any position he's in. He gave every team that kind of went up against him absolute fits trying to defend him this year. That's really been the way it's been since he got into the league. He plays with his hair on fire. He looks like an absolute madman out there with that crazy face mask that he wears. So I think, he's the ultimate game wrecker. When you look at this kind of class of defenders that came out of this draft, and, I think the Cardinals would have really benefited from having Max Crosby on their team. But, if you're going back to 2019, they're going to pick Kyler Murray just in the moment based on, what he did in college and what they needed at the time. But for the sake of this draft, we're going to take Max Crosby first overall, and I really think that he's definitely the best player in this draft and the most versatile, and any team would be lucky to really have him if this draft were to come over, be drafted today instead of in 2019. So the Niners are up second. They did draft Nick Bosa in this draft, and that would be a great option here as well, quite frankly. But for me, I'm going to draft Quinnen Williams here. Quarterbacks can deal with that edge pressure that edge rushers can produce in the NFL, but it's really the interior pressure that's the hardest to deal with for quarterbacks. Those guys tend to absolutely take over and wreck games. And, this Quinnen pick also lines up with the philosophy of the 49ers. You look at some of their blue chip picks they've had in the past with Eric Armstead, DeForest Buckner. They signed Javon Hargrave in the offseason. They really invest in that interior of their defensive line. And I think in 2019, they would have happily picked Quinnen Williams. The guy's only been producing with the Jets. He's the absolute anchor of that defensive front, and he will be for years to come. He's an incredible player, and he's only going to get better. He hasn't even really truly hit his prime yet. They just extended him, during this season. So he's got a lot left in the tank, and I think that the Niners would happily have invested in Quinnen Williams in this draft. And, there's plenty of great defensive linemen in this draft, but I do think that he sets himself apart even from some of these other great players that are here. So at pick 3, the Jets are up. This is where I think Nick Bosa would go. You can kind of toss it up between him and Max Crosby, who's better. But I do think that Max Crosby has just had more consistent of a career, especially when you put him side by side this year. Max Crosby kind of annihilated him in every statistical category. But, Nick, that's nothing against Nick Bosa. He's an absolute beast on the edge. He's a problem for any tackle that goes up against him. He's got a Defensive Player of the Year in his pocket, so it's going to be tough to kind of differentiate between those two guys. But I truly think that Max is just more versatile of a player than Nick is, and so and in that case, I would rather be drafting Max Crosby and just the consistency you get from him. And Nick Bosa kind of did have a down year this year for his standards and for the standards that 49ers fans are used to seeing from their pass rush. He kind of disappeared in that playoff game against the Packers. He got locked down by, their right tackles the whole game. So, I think if you look at this season alone, that's what puts Max Crosby over the top. But you're really just splitting hairs at this point, and the Jets get a phenomenal game-wrecking edge rusher at 3 if we were to do this draft again. So now the Raiders are up at 4. And I think, again, I really like the defensive line players that are here again, because outside of Kyler Murray, there's not much in this quarterback class. And you could argue that the Raiders with Kyler would be interesting. I don't know that the Raiders necessarily had the weapons in 2019 that the Cardinals were ready to put Kyler into the equation with, but there's, I think when you're looking at in terms of the best players available, I'm going to go with one of these defensive linemen, and I think Dexter Lawrence is the best one available. He does not get the attention that he deserves playing on the Giants and all, but he is one of the premier interior defenders in this league. He's proven that time and time again. Him and Leonard Williams are really fun to watch next to each other in that front seven. But I think that the Raiders should pick him here and get him at number 4, and he would be anchoring their defensive line today if they were to pick him in 2019. So Buccaneers are up next. We've got some great edge rushers as well. Josh Allen just had a career year. It'll be interesting to see if the Jags bring him back or not. They definitely should based on what he's done so far in his career. But again, you look at receivers too. These receivers are all really good. So, you can make an argument that there should be receivers taken this high. I just don't know that top 5 you would be taking DK Metcalf or A.J. Brown or Debo here. I think that all of those guys are phenomenal players, but, teams will pay a premium for interior pressure and, pass rush and run stopping ability. So that's kind of where I think that a guy like Jeffrey Simmons should go, is right here, because he had a lot of injuries this year that he dealt with, but in the past, he's been an absolute dog for the Titans. He's easily the best player on their defense. It's not really even close. So, the Buccaneers, if you draft Jeffrey Simmons, you'd insert him next to Vita Vea on that defensive line, and they would have an extremely good defensive line today if they were to have drafted Jeffrey Simmons in 2019. So the Giants are up now, and it's interesting that they have Rashawn Gary classified as a defensive lineman, but I think that's kind of what he played in college at Michigan based on their scheme. I do think that at this point, these are still, the defensive linemen are still the best players available. You kind of look at some of the other positional groups. Jonah Williams, this was kind of a weaker tackle class as well, so it's kind of Jonah Williams and Caleb McGarry, and that was really all that was worth picking in the first round, to be honest, in this draft. So, none of the corners really strike me as going this high. I think now that we know what we know about Devin White, he would not go this high again. The Buccaneers drafted him very high in this draft, and we know that off-ball linebackers are not a premium position. They don't go in the top 10 like they used to. It's becoming less and less of an emphasis for defenses in the NFL. So I really do think that the Giants should go with Josh Allen here. He just had a 14-sack season with the Jags. He's pretty incredible edge rusher, plethora of pass rush moves, speed, athleticism, you name it. And I think that fits exactly where he is. Today he's a top 10 player in this draft. If you look back at it, Montez Sweat again, another phenomenal freak athlete of an edge rusher. Really had a crazy season with how he got traded and ended up leading the Bears and the Commanders in sacks. Not a lot of players have been able to do that, so that's pretty impressive. But I think if you're the Jags here, you would definitely want to draft either Christian Wilkins or Montez Sweat. I think Brian Burns is also kind of that second tier edge rusher where he's not in the top, like TJ Watt, Max Crosby, Nick Bosa class, but I do think he is an elite player, and the Panthers have kind of masked how good he's been because the Panthers have really struggled the last couple years. But I think if you're the Jaguars here, I would want to take Christian Wilkins again with that emphasis on being able to blow up the game plan from the interior of that defensive line. He's definitely been what the Dolphins have wanted when they drafted him, and I don't see any problem with the Jaguars taking him here. So that could lead right into the Lions pick. Ed Oliver is still here, but I do think that he's slightly below some of the other guys we've drafted so far. He really came on this year, but he's kind of had some ups and downs in his career, and I don't know that he's necessarily a better player than Montez Sweat, Brian Burns, or any of these receivers for that matter of fact, or Kyler Murray. But I do think that the Lions here would want to take Montez Sweat just to establish that dominant pass rush. If this draft were to be played over again, they would really be getting a premium player at a premium position. So I just think that makes the most sense. The Bills, we're going to look here. I think the Bills, knowing what we know about their receiving core now, it would be really nice to pick one of these receivers in 2019. That's part of the fun of this whole thing, is you can just kind of pick and choose, guys that you want to see on certain teams. And so for me, I'd really love to see A.J. Brown on the Bills opposite Stephon Diggs. That would easily have allowed them to win a few more of their playoff games over the last couple of seasons. Bills fans have really gone through the ringer with how this team has kind of performed, and they've had a lot of unfortunate things. And I think having A.J. Brown would be a nice second option for Josh Allen. They'd have a 1A, 1B combo with him and Stephon Diggs. Defenses would really struggle to guard one guy or another. And I do think he's had a better career than DK Metcalf and Debo. He's been pretty consistent with his production. When the Titans were functional, he was an absolute weapon for them. I mean, Ryan Tannehill really did a nice job throwing the ball to him. When he got traded to the Eagles, and he's had a much better situation than DK has had in terms of quarterbacks. I know, Jalen Hurts isn't necessarily an elite quarterback, but he's better than Geno Smith, and so I think he's had a much more fortunate situation than DK has with the way the Seahawks have kind of gone through quarterbacks during his career. And the reason I'm not choosing Debo here is because I think Debo really works in that Shanahan system. I'm not saying he'd be a worse player on another team, but his production is very heavily reliant on being able to get the ball in unique ways that only Shanahan can draw up. Shanahan's one of the genius play callers in this league, and he uses Debo to his advantage. And I don't know that, he would still be certainly an incredible player on the Bills, but I just think that A.J. Brown would be the better player here going forward overall. It's just this receiving class is really stacked when you look at the guys you have here, so it's pretty tough. The Broncos at 10. This is an interesting one where I think that the Broncos could certainly go with Rashawn Gary here. That would be something to get, it'd be interesting to see how that would have turned out, but I think Brian Burns and Rashawn Gary were very similar players in that they're freak athletes with a similar type of move set coming out of college. And, those guys could go hand in hand with where they would go if this draft were to be replayed over again. So, in my opinion here, I do think that the Broncos have needed a franchise quarterback for a long time, and they should draft Kyler Murray. Knowing what we know now about Russ and how he got traded over, just things didn't really work out there. And the Broncos certainly have shown they can't draft quarterbacks at an elite level whatsoever. I mean, you look at some of the guys they missed on; it's just a very long list. So that would kind of put their quarterback struggles to rest with that. So I'm not saying Kyler wouldn't have fallen off. I mean, he's dealt with injuries this year too, and tore his ACL last year, but he's definitely better than any other quarterback the Broncos would have had their hands on, between 2019 and now. So Looking at the Bengals here, knowing that they got Jamar Chase down the road, 2020, it would be really nice for them to have, because they do have Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins as well, so their receiving core is pretty filled out. I think I'd be more willing to give them a guy like Brian Burns, who's just an elite pass rusher, and he would really be a guy they'd be looking to keep around. Once his rookie contract would be up, if he were to be on the Bengals. So for this one's pretty easy. Green Bay needed to look receiver around this time. That was kind of the criticism of Green Bay, was that they never went out and got Rodgers another receiver besides Devontae. And this would have been the perfect draft to do it. I think a guy that Aaron would have loved throwing to would be DK Metcalf. Nothing needs to be said about him. I mean, he's just an incredible physical specimen. He's just a mismatch for any corner that lines up across from him, and that's something that the Packers really needed in this era of the Matt LaFleur, Aaron Rodgers offense, where they kind of struggled to find other receivers and get other people involved. And so I think that would have put any criticism to rest of this front office if they were to draft DK Metcalf there. And who knows, Aaron Rodgers might have another Super Bowl out of it too. So the Dolphins at pick 13, we do have some interesting players left here with, TJ Hawkinson, phenomenal tight end. Shame he tore his ACL this year, but you want a franchise tight end. TJ definitely fits that role. He's a top 10 tight end in the league for sure. And I think he's a better player than what you would get with Rashawn Gary or Ed Oliver. Chris Lindstrom had an absolutely phenomenal year with the Falcons. That Falcons offensive line was very underrated. Didn't get enough appreciation because of the record they had during the season. But, when you look at the players around, I think that TJ Hawkinson is the best threat available for Miami's offense. And, he would have served them very well in this draft. Now the Falcons are up, and we're going to go with Josh Jacobs is here. You could get a dynamic running back with him, but we know that running backs aren't necessarily a premium position anymore. We haven't really seen a guy like Saquon come out of college that's, a bona fide top 10 pick. They drafted Bijan in the top 10 anyways going forward, so they would have had a good running back in the future. But I do think that they should take Rashawn Gary here. That's kind of the last premium pass rusher available on the board. If you look at the other guys that are available. So, he's definitely going to go high in this draft if it were to happen again. He didn't have the best second half of the season, but he's still a premium edge rusher, a very high-quality player in this league, and he will be for a long time. So I think he belongs there at 14. The Commanders being up, none of the linebackers really excite me other than Dre Greenlaw. It's still just too high to take a linebacker, and if you ask me, a lot of decent corners, but no shutdown corner that's going to be the anchor of your secondary really. The only guys I would consider in the first round at all, to be honest, would be Jamel Dean and Sean Murphy-Bunting. So I don't think they should take a corner here. C.J. Gardner-Johnson, phenomenal safety, but I think it's too high. It's probably honestly Ed Oliver or Debo. Those are probably the best guys left. Dawson Knox is here as well, but to me it's Debo Samuel. The Washington Commanders desperately needed some athleticism in this draft. I think they took Dwayne Haskins in this draft, which we all know is a sad story. It didn't quite end the way that maybe we all thought it would. The Commanders really just have been a dysfunctional franchise in terms of supporting quarterbacks and allowing them to succeed. So it is funny they could have taken Scary Terry here, but Debo Samuel's the better receiver in today's league, so that's why he would go at pick 15 to them. The Panthers are up, and maybe they could take Scary Terry here. Deontay Johnson as well. I think those are the two best receivers left. Jacoby, very good route runner for the Raiders. I still think he would be a first-round pick in this draft as well. Marquise Brown as well. But to me, they would go Ed Oliver. He's the best defender left on the board. He's again, his career path's been kind of interesting to watch, but the Bills have really gotten a lot out of him this year, and he showed why he can be a game wrecker in this league. And so I think he should definitely go in the top 20 picks here in this draft. So looking at the Giants, to me, this is where Scary Terry would go for me. You know, he is a number one receiver in Washington, no matter what people say. He can definitely beat some of the better corners in this league. I mean, he really gave Jair Alexander problems in the past. He's given other corners plenty of other problems. So he is a top receiver. He's one of the top guys in this draft class, and he would definitely be perfect for the Giants at pick 17. The Vikings, to me, I think C.J. Gardner-Johnson would be a great player for them here. The Vikings either draft a receiver or a corner in the first round in recent memory. It's just kind of been their philosophy. Either get an explosive receiver that can take the top off a defense or keep throwing the dartboard at corners. I mean, they've really struggled to find a lockdown corner since Patrick Peterson left them, and they've been trying in the draft. To their credit, they've been really picking a lot of guys. But if you look at that room today, who are you really excited about in there? Caleb Evans is a guy they kind of have high hopes for. But, you know, Harrison Smith's their safety. That's still, you know, he's aging. So C.J. Gardner-Johnson would be great. You know, versatile chess piece for that defense, especially with the way now we see that Brian Flores really likes to bring blitz packages. You know, he really blitzes the quarterback and rushes the passer in that form. And, you know, CJ would be a great player for them to do that. He's also a very vocal leader, talks a lot of smack, which is something that any defense needs to get in the head of the opponent. So he'd be a perfect pick there for the Vikings. The Titans are up here at pick 19. And, you know, this is kind of where it gets a little bit more tough. It's very, very subjective here. And Deontay Johnson's certainly the most dynamic player left on the board. So I think that would make some sense. But, you know, Josh Jacobs is also a very, very versatile player as well. He's great, you know, at catching the pass out of the backfield, which maybe the Titans would like. But for me, it's Deontay Johnson. I mean, you look what he's done with the Steelers, and they haven't had particularly great. I mean, Big Ben in the later stages of his career was really starting to slow down a bit, and now they're on the mess they have with Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph, and Trubisky, and he's still been able to be a productive receiver no matter who's throwing him the ball. And, you know, I think in Tennessee he'd be a great fit there. You know, he's a great receiver. He's certainly the most dynamic of the players left out of this grouping that we're seeing. So the Steelers are up, and for this one, I would probably start to look at offensive line. I don't think any of these corners are better than the linemen that are left. Certainly, you know, you could make a statement that maybe one of these linebackers could go here, but the Steelers have already tried that with Devin Bush, and they know as well as anybody that picking a linebacker high certainly doesn't always work out. Not all of that was Devin Bush's fault. I mean, he did get injured, but I think that the Steelers should draft Jonah Williams. He can be their franchise tackle. You know, especially now when their offensive line definitely has underperformed in certain facets of the game over the last couple seasons. So, in my opinion, that would have been a great pick here. And leading into that, I think that you're right on the border of where some of these edge guys might start to go again. But, you know, you look at Elton Jenkins, Chris Lindstrom, McGovern. These are three pretty good interior offensive linemen. You could pretty much choose any of them. I think the one who's been the most consistent has been Elton Jenkins, and he's, you know, the Packers played him in a lot of positions early on. He got a lot of snaps at center, he got a lot of snaps at tackle. He's kind of settled into his left guard position now, but the Seahawks would be getting a phenomenal offensive lineman here. Chris Lindstrom's been great for the Falcons, but he really only came on the last 2 seasons, you know, as like one of the top guards in the league, so I think that Elton would be a better pick there for them. The Ravens absolutely should go edge here, and I think that they would draft a player like Carl Granderson. Now, he's not talked about very much, but he's been really a solid player for the Saints. The Saints always seem to have physical edge rushers that can kind of play inside and on the outside. And they've had a lot of guys in that room kind of rotating through. So it's been hard for any one of those guys to really eat and rack up sacks during the season, but Carl Granderson would fit great in the Ravens, kind of defensive culture. They really love smash mouth football and intense defenses, and so Carl Granderson is definitely the pick that the Ravens would have made here, and he would have been a great fit right away for them. He would have been a producer in that defense, a great pass rusher for them. So with the Texans up, I think this is a spot where, I don't know, you could take Jakobi Meyers here. I think that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but I would certainly look Josh Jacobs here. Get the Texans a franchise running back. The guy, set all sorts of franchise records for Las Vegas last year, and I just think that he probably is the most dynamic and versatile player left on the board, so he would go there for sure. Marquise Brown, certainly a speed guy, but he's really struggled with consistency during his career. He's not necessarily been what the Cardinals wanted, and I don't think he was what the Ravens wanted because of how they dealt him during the draft. So he's certainly available here. I think the Raiders, maybe a corner, maybe a safety. Again, there's a significant gap between a lot of these guys and the players that we've already taken, but I do think that the Raiders should take Chris Lindstrom here and draft a significantly better offensive lineman than a lot of teams have. And if they can get the version of him that the Falcons have had the last 2 years, that would be great for them going forwards. And I think it would really change where they're at right now in terms of what they need to draft coming up in 2024. So the Eagles here, a guy I really love, Van Ginkel's awesome. I think they should go with Mike Edwards. Very seldomly talked about safety. He was with the Buccaneers when they had that Super Bowl run in Tom Brady. He caused that fumble on Aaron Jones in the NFC Championship game that kind of turned the tables for the worse on the Packers. That's a play that if that doesn't happen, who knows what the Packers do. Maybe they knock the Buccaneers out of the playoff that year. But he was really a great safety for them, and they just had a ton of safety depth, so they couldn't re-sign him. And he ended up being a Chief. And, the Chiefs really do a lot of unique things in that Spagnuolo defense. And, a lot of teams would kill to have a consistent safety like that. And I think the Eagles, especially now, you look at where their roster's at, they're in desperate need of a safety that can be an impact playmaker. So for me, Mike Edwards would be great for the Eagles if this draft were to run itself over again. And he would fit in well with what they were trying to do going forwards. Again, I still don't know if any of these corners are really, Sean Murphy-Bunting, Jamel Dean. Those are the two guys that I think are the best out of this group. Rock Ya-Sin was great as a Colt and not so great as a Raider. Byron Murphy, been kind of up and down. I just don't know that any of these corners really, impress many people. And so, for the Colts, I think you got to go Andrew Van Ginkel here. He's another high-effort player who's played incredibly good football for the Dolphins this year. He's really fun to watch. It's a shame he got injured for their playoff run because I think he would have been a difference maker in that game against the Chiefs, in the cold weather. But the Colts get their edge rusher here. He would also fit the culture of what they want. The Colts love a good pass rush. They have a very good defensive line every year. He would have fit right in with that, and that's a player that not a lot of people would think would have been a first-round pick in 2019, but look at how the role he's carved out for himself in Miami. It's only been a success story for him, and the Dolphins, I know for sure, are happy that they have him. So I think he could easily be a top 30 player in this draft if it were to happen again. So that exhausts all the edge players that we've deemed to be first-round talent when you look back at this draft. I think that the Raiders here, we've already drafted two. We've gotten better in the trenches with this draft, for sure, with Lindstrom and Lawrence. It clearly doesn't like the picks based on the grades it's given here, but I think that they should take Dawson Knox, go to the offensive side of the ball. He's been very good for the Bills, had trouble staying healthy at times, He's a very good possession tight end, and he would have fit really nicely across from Darren Waller on the teams that they were able to put together, 2019, 2020. So I think Dawson Knox is a great pick there. That's kind of the last, of the best pass catchers available. I would say Marquise Brown and Hunter Renfrow, Jacoby Myers, they're all nice players for sure. And, would the Chargers really want one of those guys versus, say, taking Connor McGovern, or David Montgomery, I think would be a good pick here. Caleb McGarry as well. So for me in this, I think I would go Connor McGovern. You get an anchor to your offensive line. He's been a really good player as well, and that's something the Chargers have struggled with at times. Outside of Rashawn Slater and Corey Linsley, kind of who have they had in the offensive line that's really performed extremely well? And that's a group that really regressed too under Brandon Staley. So maybe if they took Connor McGovern in this draft, it would have helped things down the line, and they wouldn't have to worry about it as much. So with the Seahawks here, I think a player that Pete Carroll would have loved in 2019 is John Kaminsky from Charleston, of all places. This guy really burst onto the scene with the Lions last year. And, if you watch him, he fits so well into that culture and what the Lions want to do. What Dan Campbell's trying to get his defense to do as well. So I also think Pete Carroll, similar kind of coach to Dan Campbell, very good at motivating players, very good at getting the most out of the roster. And so, Kaminsky would have fit great on the Seahawks team, and it would have been, another guy in a long line of solid pass rushers that the Seahawks have had, going back to the Legion of Boom. So he would have been very fun to see with Pete Carroll. That would have been quite a good couple of years for Seattle on defense, I think. So the Packers are up here, and this is, again, I'm going to hammer it home on the receiver train here. They really should have gone receiver in one of these drafts, like 2018, 2019, to kind of get Rodgers some more help. And so I think out of these guys, I want the guy with the most nuance to his game. And to me, Marquise Brown is just a speed guy. He doesn't really have a lot of other, he's not a contested catch guy. He's not a crazy route runner. He's kind of just a speed guy. And so for that reason, I would look to one of these other more technical route running receivers. And for me, that's Jacoby Myers because, he's able to do a lot of stuff out of the backfield that Hunter Renfrow might not be able to do. I mean, Hunter Renfrow is an absolute technician with his route running as well, but Myers certainly has more speed, has more, shift with the ball in his hands. And I think him and DK in this draft for the Packers would have really changed how things may have gone in the postseason for them, in these next 4 years after 2019. So we're down to the last two picks, and we got the Rams and the Patriots left. You kind of got to think what the Rams would have really been looking for here in this draft. It's just funny that there's so many of these linebackers left. And Caleb McGarry, very solid tackle. I do think that Dre Greenlaw would have been someone the Rams could have potentially looked at. And, I know linebacker's not the most premium of positions, but I do think that the Rams, they were fresh off a Super Bowl appearance during this draft. They really did have a good roster. So adding Dre Greenlaw would have been a phenomenal piece in the middle of their defense. And so now we're down to the Patriots, and you got to kind of think, who's the best guy left? Certainly these corners, I think Jamel Dean or Sean Murphy-Bunting are probably the best two available, but Bill Belichick doesn't necessarily always draft those skill positions. So I think Caleb McGarry probably would have been the pick here. If this draft were to happen again. So that does conclude the 2019 redraft. This is very subjective stuff. Somebody else could do the same thing and draft completely different guys at every position. And that's personally what I think is fun about it. You get to kind of discuss which players have really developed the best since this draft. And so, to me, I think Max Crosby was the crown jewel of this draft class. And honestly, he could be underrated considering the media coverage a lot of the other edge rushers in the NFL get. So, one last look over this draft. I think we did pretty good with this. I mean, a lot of players here. It's so easy to just go back in time too and point to, oh, this guy's better than this guy and all that stuff. But to me, this is a pretty good draft overall. So let me know what kind of feedback you guys have on this. Like what players you would have rather picked that I maybe didn't look at, or who maybe I overlooked in this. So thanks for tuning in. I plan on having a couple more mock drafts coming up in the future. Thanks for watching.